Karen Horney is one of my favorite psychologists from back in the day. She was the one to really challenge Freud. She wrote a lot about our inner conflicts. In fact, she has a book called Our Inner Conflicts. And she talks a lot about the importance of bringing into harmony various aspects of ourselves by getting in touch and really connecting with the most alive, unique, creative center of your being. So much of your struggle, your inner struggles, are transcended the moment you discover your purpose, or the moment you discover, because I think we can have multiple purposes, but you discover that you change your goal hierarchy. So the things that preoccupied you before that seemed like the most important things to address, like your lack of people liking you or your lack of all the deprivations, it shifts more to what you actually are connected to, that's alive and can contribute to the world. And all those other concerns, it's not they don't become concerns or they're not still fighting, but they naturally get into a harmony with each other when you are really strongly connected to that very special self.
So, if you can give somebody the experience of connecting to that core self where they feel like most fully alive, it's almost like you can create a shift in their value hierarchy where that becomes the most important thing, and then other things become nested underneath that. And it sort of gives people a better orientation in life.
Ooh, yeah, that's very well put.
Okay, Scott, welcome to the show. Now, to get started, I've heard you say a quote from Irvin Yalom that really gets to the essence of your new book, and this is the quote. It's sooner or later you have to give up hope for a better past. So, can you maybe just expand on the significance of this a little bit and why these words mean so much?
I do think it's important to give up all hope for the better past. It's a really profound way of phrasing the issue, because it recognizes that we can't change the past, that maybe something horrible has happened to us, and we can't. Um, in a lot of ways, all we can do is focus on living a life that is hopeful and productive, and having thoughts that are hopeful and productive. We can't, barring a time machine, we can't go back and change things, and eventually, and not all. It's not for everyone right away. I'm not a big fan of ripping off people's defense mechanisms if they're not ready for it. But that's every part of that phrase is important, such as the sooner or later part. You know, ultimately, you do have to give up all hope that the past will change.
For sure, for sure. And your new book, Rise Above, what would you say are some of the main things you were hoping people would take away from reading that book?
Well, a big thread of my whole life's work is on human potential and unlocking people's abilities, large scale, and all the ways that we can hold ourselves back. When people hear about a victim mindset, like they hear the phrase "overcome a victim mindset," um, people are often referring to stop being like playing the victim or thinking you're the victim of life. And while we're all victims to life in a very true way, it's not easy being human. This book was I thought, an interesting twist on it, where I talk about all the ways in which we can become victims to ourselves. We can become a victim to our own emotions when we identify too much with them. We can become a victim to our cognitions, our thoughts when we're distorted. We become a victim to our past when we refuse to give up all hope for a better past, for instance. And so there are a lot of things that we really do to hold ourselves back from realizing our full potential.
For sure, for sure. Now, something that really grabbed me in this was the idea that vulnerable narcissism is the biggest inhibitor to self actualization, more so than IQ, creativity, and intelligence. So, what exactly is vulnerable narcissism and what distinguishes it from other forms?
Yeah, vulnerable narcissism is a quieter form of narcissism that's more introverted. It's not as, there is a form of narcissism called grandiose narcissism, which is all about pounding your chest and, um, saying, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest. There is a more vulnerable form of narcissism, which is, uh, I'm not the greatest, but I deserve special privileges because I've suffered more than everyone else. So there still is the entitlement aspect to it, but you're not entitled. You don't feel entitled because you think you're the best. You feel entitled because, well, I've suffered more than everyone else, so therefore I should have unique special privileges no one else has.
So suffering through this lens almost becomes like a competition. Like people are trying to outsuffer each other for kudos.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, there we are living through the age of the victimhood Olympics.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Now another thing that's quite interesting is you've built your entire career around, I suppose, what is it? Helping people see that diagnoses aren't their destiny. And why is this so important to you, Scott?
Oh, well, I experienced some things in my early childhood that made me really become aware of, all the ways in which we hold ourselves back and the way that other people hold us back, the way a victim mindset can hold us back. I was placed in special education as a very young kid for a learning disability that I had, an auditory learning disability. And it didn't take until ninth grade till decided to just once and for all overcome that. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to see what I'm capable of. I'm not going to believe all of these limiting beliefs that others have about me, which I've started to internalize. We really do a lot of internalization of people's expectations of us, and we very rarely reflect on those internalizations and challenge them. I love to continually challenge those internalizations, like, oh, I'm not good enough to try that, or and where are those thoughts coming from? They're coming from others, really, that we've internalized. So as Michael Jordan said, it's personal. Do you remember The Last Dance? You remember?
I
Did you catch that
I did.
reference?
I actually watched that 5 years ago, so it's been a while. So I'll need to rewatch. But what was the what was the sequence of events that led for you to having that internal decision? I'm not going to let other people's expectations define me. What was it that caused that in you to sort of say, no, I'm not going with that?
Well, you believe the evidence that's inside you. Never quite put it that way before, but I think that's my answer to your question. I had gone through so many years where I was confused that on the one hand, I knew that I was capable of more. I became a computer hacker. I did all these things that suggested I was smart, on the side, and that I wasn't able to show people. I did a lot of creative writing. I had a rich fantasy where I acted out soap opera plot lines in my head. And I got to this point where I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just believe that evidence. That I mean, no one else sees that evidence, right? But I'm gonna believe in it. You look throughout the course of history at anyone who's made it far beyond what other people have done, and you see they have a sense of irrational, what appears to be irrational self belief, and a belief in themselves. But sometimes you have to start out with that. I would also say I felt like what I had was rational self belief. You know, um, trust your rational self belief.
So if someone is looking to make a change in their life, there's a lot to be said for sort of just, going back through your past and looking for evidence of times when you have done something difficult or overcome adversity and using this as sort of like a propeller for moving you forward.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And this seems to have lit a bit of a fire under you because you went on to do some pretty incredible things.
That's
Maybe a
nice of
good
you to say that.
Well, it's true, and I think a really interesting place to to start that was the story of how you get into Carnegie Mellon, and you didn't actually study psychology initially.
Um, Yes, so this is true. Um, I initially got rejected from the psychology program, the cognitive science program at Carnegie Mellon, which is what I ended up doing in my career. And I tried to figure out alternative pathways to get to where I wanted to go. And I also was a pretty good singer. I was in the choir, and I won a all regional choir, and I had a voice teacher, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to audition for the opera program, and like I'm going to get into this college one way or another, and they let me in on a partial scholarship for opera.
And then from there, how did you transition into psychology?
Well, after the first year, I took a course on intro psychology that I really liked and was really fascinating. And I went into the psychology department and I said, "Hey, do you think I could be a minor in psychology? I took a course I really liked, and it was not a big deal to be a minor." And she's like, "No problem. No one's ever been this excited to be a minor in psychology." So she let me in to be a minor, and then I transferred into a major after another semester.
And the whole time, you know, early on in this journey, did you have a clear idea of what you wanted to do, or you were sort of just putting one foot in front of the other and seeing where things were leading you?
You're asking some hard hitting questions, my friend.
Curious.
I think that at that time, and I had to go back to my mindset at that time, but I think I knew in high school, my senior year of high school, that I wanted to redefine intelligence. I wanted to redefine the standard metrics of human potential. Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty clear thing to know back then, and it must have give you a lot of determination to overcome all the obstacles that you would have encountered along the way, which I think there's something to be learned from there as well. Like, if you have something that you really want to do and you're really clear about it, then it makes the obstacles a lot easier to overcome when they arise.
I really, really wanted to redefine human intelligence. And it's the only thing I would talk about for anyone who would listen to me for a good period of 10 years or so. And I would spend all my time in the library reading books on human intelligence. And I sought out this guy at University of Cambridge who was the world's leading expert on IQ. And I said, teach me everything you know about IQ. So that was, yeah, it was a fun time.
This brings me to something, Jonathan Haidt interviewed you for your book on your podcast, and something that really stuck out for me was, I think you said whenever you started your career, you thought the way to study human potential was through studying intelligence and changing the way we measure intelligence in the school system, but that only took you so far. So you used to think the narrow definition and conceptualization of intelligence was part of what was holding you back. But in your most recent book, you sort of go beyond that, and you're looking at a certain mindset and a way of thinking about the world. That's the root of the problem here. It's not the intelligent aspect or intelligence aspect.
So what was my argument? Say it again.
Basically, that you thought that it was the narrow definition of and conceptualization of intelligence that was what was really holding you back. But in your current book, you're sort of saying, no, it's actually a mindset. It's a way of thinking. It's probably this perpetual victim mindset that's the real root of the issue here.
No, I wouldn't say that. um, let me think this through. So I do think that intelligence is a thing that matters, um, and I also think that the way we tend to measure it, has been through these abstract, decontextualized testing sessions where we bring you into a sterile psychologist room and we ask you to think of, well, how many uses are there for a brick, and all these other things, and or like come up with these analogies, and it really takes out of the picture a person's personal journey and their own personal dreams and desires, and the power that can happen when we're really engaged in something. So really the way I'm thinking about intelligence is, well, IQ is how it traditionally has been measured, and that is measuring a certain set of cognitive abilities. However, I think personal intelligence matters too, and that's the kind of intelligence that you only see in a human when their passion and their abilities are well matched, like their engagement and their passion, their engagement and their abilities are well matched in the service of reaching some longer term goals or a higher purpose. and that just is something, information you don't get from you don't glean from a single one shot intelligence testing session. And I think that I also think that I'm a big advocate of neurodiversity. So I think that that there are many different ways that people who are neurodivergent, whether on the autism spectrum or dyslexia, whatever it is, can have difficulty on an IQ testing, an intelligence testing session, that doesn't fully reveal their full intelligence. So that's the kind of nuance I like to put into the picture.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate that. When you look back on your career, are there any obstacles in particular that were extremely difficult to overcome that you think that required everything from me? Was there anything in particular that was really difficult?
I mean, there are a lot of things I've had to overcome throughout my life, and I also don't I try not to have a victim mindset over them. I try to learn from everything, and I try to um, think about, you know what, when I get my next chance to do the redo on that, I'm already thinking about how I'm going to act in that moment. I don't like dwelling on the past, my friend. You know, so many people, they just won't stop talking about that one thing that happened to them when they were 3, and they're not in the moment, and they're also not thinking about, well, they're nothing but all the amazing opportunities that are available in their lives right now, you know? So for me, I've had to overcome a lot of things, and there are a lot of steps along the way where people really, I feel like I'm constantly underestimated. And then I have to get, I'm like, here we go again. Now I have to prove that I can do this. And then I do it, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, I didn't know you could do that." I remember when I went through this big weight. A bunch of people on Facebook were making fun of my weight. To be fair, it did skyrocket at one point, and that was a wake up call for me. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to show any picture for a year of me, and then I'm just going to come out and show them I'm going to lose 30 pounds, and I did it, and everyone was like shocked. They're like, "Wow, how did you do that?" And it's like I just feel like I'm constantly going through things where maybe that is a little Michael Jordan-ish, where I like it. I like to prove people wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if that works for you, then why not leverage it? Like not all motivation has to be this like really intrinsic pure form. Like if something works, leverage it.
Yeah.
Um, I I imagine you've received quite a bit of, maybe not, but my guess is you've received probably quite a bit of hate for this book. Um, what's that been like, and how have you dealt with it?
I haven't. No, why? Tell me why I should face heat. I haven't actually.
Well, it's a book about sort of taking responsibility for your life and not having a victim mindset, and obviously there's nuance and depth into what you're writing about, but
Almost every sentence I try to give some sort of caveat.
yes, but when people see a cover, they immediately just jump to conclusions and then start attacking usually. But if that hasn't happened,
You know what? It probably should have happened, but I think that people know that I'm not in this to be antagonistic. Like my goal is to help unlock people's potential, and I think intentions matter. There are a lot of people who do talk about the importance of overcoming a victim mindset in a sort of like, the liberal snowflakes need to STFU sort of way, and stop complaining. And that's not the energy that I'm bringing to this topic. There are a lot of topics I've talked about in my career that I probably should have um, uh, gotten hate, but I don't get hate. It's interesting. Yeah, I probably should get more hate than I do. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
don't ask for it. And when you were researching the book, were there any surprises for you? Things that you might not have expected to discover that stood out for you?
Yeah, a bunch of things. One major thing I try to tackle in the book is group collective victimhood, and I see that as a real issue in the world today. And the Israel-Palestine conflict is a great example of that, where both sides feel like they're the victim of each other. And it's hard to make progress in any situation when that's the case. Um, and some of that research surprised me. Some of the things that have been shown to really reduce the tensions and reduce the difficulties. Um, uh, Acknowledging that a terrible thing has happened on the other side, even if you don't say you're responsible for it, but just acknowledging it can go a really long way. When you have people who are so tribal and into their focus being, well, we have to make sure that our group ego is not destroyed. It can lead to a state of lack of empathy for the other, and a big part of so a lot of the research I was reading on the ways in which tribalism can really reduce our empathy for those in our out group really was eye opening to me and made me want to change things a bit.
Okay. This is a slightly random question, but something I was curious to ask you, and you don't have to answer it if we can move on if you wouldn't like if you wouldn't like to. But if were you were debating Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk, are there
Oh
any
boy.
points that you'd love to really communicate in that debate?
I've had some heated and respectful email exchanges with Gabor about this, and actually, in my most recent exchange with him, it ended up being very cordial and respectful, and and I even made some changes to one of the articles I was writing while staying committed to still believing other things. And he's like, I respect that. He's like, fair enough. And so that was a nice exchange. The big thing is that they really downplay the role of genes. And they really downplay the role of pre-existing individual differences in explaining reactions to trauma. um, they use trauma as this kind of catch-all phrase that is everywhere in their view. You know, everywhere you look, there's trauma, and it also dilutes the meaning of the word trauma if everything's traumatic. But also, it does in a lot of ways give us a victim mindset over life and over external circumstances. The and we it maybe can make us not aware of all the things that are within our control, despite challenging and adverse conditions, which I never deny. Or, I mean, it is hard being human. And for some humans, it is harder than other humans. I acknowledge that too. I call it honest love, where I acknowledge and validate someone's pain. And then I also try to empower.
I like that, and the language we use matters. And we talk about trauma informed therapy, and that can be problematic for people. Can you maybe just share your thoughts on this?
Um, Trauma informed therapy is a form of therapy that is very centered around trauma. And I do fear that in some cases, talking about your trauma every session and involving everything around that one thing that happened to you when you were three um, can feel disempowering. It constantly reminds you in your consciousness the control and power you don't have in life, and that's not my vibe. I do think there are a lot of well-meaning and good trauma-informed therapists who are informed by the impact that trauma can play in our lives and bring that into their practice when appropriate. All I'm challenging is those who force that trauma framework on every patient in every session.
Yeah, I I had my first course of psychotherapy. It would have been a couple of years ago now, and there was a point where we sort of we went into the past, and it was helpful, but then there was sort of like a threshold where it was just like every week we were digging up something new from the past, and it was sort of just like I was sort of at a point where I think would have been so much more helpful just to sort of to leave it there and focus on the future and focus on the present. But the therapist I was working with almost insisted on keeping going back, and to me, it wasn't helpful. So I think there's a limit, and I suppose it depends on the individual receiving the therapy to be aware of that what that is for them. Um,
That's great. You've done therapy?
I've been on the receiving end of therapy. I haven't. I'm not a therapist myself.
Yeah, but you've been on the receiving end. That's cool. Yeah, and you found it helpful?
I did to a certain point, and then yeah, and then I think it was just time to move on. What about yourself? Have you been through therapy?
I have. I have. It's difficult for me finding a therapist. That I feel like they're saying something that I haven't heard before.
I can imagine.
Because after doing the psychology podcast for 11 years, I'm like, I want some new insight here, and I have trouble getting it sometimes. But
If you could have any coach or mentor, living or dead, who would you choose?
any coach, Abraham Maslow.
I guess you might say that. um, Something I was wanting to ask you was about this idea of our culture is sort of overcorrected, and we're in a situation now where like victimhood is quite normal and all the rest. And do you think these things go through cycles where like they go so far to one extreme and then they correct, and this is just a cycle of that most cultures go through with ideas and sort of memes.
Yeah, I think yes, we're constantly going through these cycles. The the sort of peak wokeness of 2020 is not as prominent at all right now, and now we have the react opposite reaction to it, which is obnoxious. You know, in my view, the Trump sort of anyone who says anything against us, will get deported or whatever, and that's horrifying. I don't know if you're following American politics, but so you see things going bouncing back and forth in the extremes, and I think that's a shame. I think that you know there should be some center that holds of rationality and reason um, and a care and concern for what's best for most people.
From the outside, it seems like America is in chaos at the moment. I'm just curious to get what's that like for you? I assume you're in New York, or
I'm in New York.
what's it
It's
like for? Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say, what's your internal experience like being there? Does it feel stable? Does it feel safe? Does it worry you?
I'm worried. I am worried. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, a very prominent professor, who decided to move to Canada. Just couldn't take it anymore. Um, I am worried. I um, there's so much divisiveness um, and a lot of people's input, which used to be implicit biases, and hate that was implicit for so many years is now coming out and getting popular on like social media. It's like becoming normalized. What I'm most worried about is for extreme views that are hateful and discriminative to become normalized, and I see that happening a lot more these days.
So, can you tell me about the distinction between being a victim and having a perpetual victim mindset?
Oh, I think it's really important to we probably should have said this right up top. It's really important to distinguish between having been a legitimate, genuine victim of terrible life circumstances, and having a perpetual victim mindset where everywhere you go, you see threat, and you blame all the world, you blame all your problems on the world, and you don't take responsibility for your actions, the way you show up, the way you respond to things, and you don't live your life with a sense of intention and purpose for a better future. And it's possible to have been the victim of terrible life circumstances and to not have a victim mindset. It's possible to have not been a victim of terrible life circumstances and have a victim mindset, a perpetual. These things are independent of each other.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And really, my book is about helping people with them, set people up for the mindset for the best success in their lives. Self-actualization.
I think it's hard to underestimate just how important the stories we tell ourselves are. Like, it's obviously this is not in any way severe or anything, but I'm a type 1 diabetic. I got it when I was 6, and very early on my mum told me, she was like, look, this could be the best thing that ever happens to you, because it's going to force you to really take care of your health. It's going to force you to exercise. You'll be healthier than your friends. You'll be better at football, etc., etc. You don't have cancer. You're not going to die. You can have a full life, and never let anybody tell you that you can't do something because of this. And like, it was just a few sentences, but that stayed with me my whole life and had just an incredible effect. Like, so stories matter.
Oh man, the story you tell yourself, um, not, and also your self schema matters a lot. The way that you view yourself, and um, when you think of yourself, do you see yourself as a competent, powerful, um, effective person in this world, or do you think you see yourself as kind of broken deep down, kind of like at its base? Um, like, do you have an uncertain self esteem where you just don't know who you are, and you're kind of like the whim of validation from others? Um, in a lot of ways, that's just a story. What is the story you're telling about yourself? And it can be such a powerful change. I mean, I think that change can see. The thing is, I hope I bring a hopeful vibe, because I think that, um, being able to recognize some of the ways in which you've been holding yourself back can allow you to change just like that, and I created a form of coaching I call self-actualization coaching, and I we train coaches to be certified self-actualization coaches, but I also am I am not certified. I am a self-actualization. I'm certified by myself, but I'm a self-actualization coach myself, and I see it. I see the change that is possible when I work one on one with individuals. Some of them come to me feeling a real lack of a sense of meaning in their lives, a lack of a sense of, self. Um, uh, who am I? What am I on this earth to do? And I find a lot of it comes down to the stories they've been telling themselves about themselves that haven't come from themselves. They've come from other perceptions of them.
And then, so what would you say the aim of self-actualization coaching is? Where are you hoping to get people that come through your programs and come to you for coaching?
Well, we take a whole person approach to coaching, where we recognize that, there's usually it's like a system, of things that aren't working. When something feels like it's not working, it's not just one issue. It's usually a bunch of basic needs that are not being met, or in some cases, it's people's growth needs are not being met. It's not just that they feel safe, and they don't feel safe and secure, or they don't feel loved, or they don't feel good about themselves, but it's that they're not getting the opportunities in their life to have creative self-actualization, to feel like they're really, putting out into the world, something that is the deepest expression of their being. That's the most unique thing that they have to offer the world. And I have clients that you could just see it in their eyes. They tear up, they cry, because their soul is just yearning so deeply, for that expression. And I think that's all we all want, is to have that expression. And we inhibit ourselves in so many ways because we're not seeing the greater potential we have within ourselves.
Beautiful. And like, let's say someone was to come to you and it became clear, after doing an initial kind of conversation and assessment, that maybe they had some basic attachment needs that weren't being met. But you also realized, okay, this person has the need to express themselves creatively, and that need's not being met either. Do you sort of take an approach where you would, if you take, I don't know if you use Maslow's, you don't look at it as a hierarchy, is that right? But if would you look at the uh, the more foundational layers first, target those, and then move to the sort of higher layers, or would you do them simultaneously?
It's a complex question. Can you just would you mind asking me that again?
Yeah, that was a word salad. Sorry. If someone's coming to you and you realize this person's basic attachment needs aren't being met,
Yeah.
but they also express a desire for more self expression, do you think it's wise to do both in tandem, or would you sort of target the more foundational needs first before moving on?
Yeah, it's a system. And so you have to address multiple fronts simultaneously, I think. It's not see, to me, life is not like Maslow's hierarchy of needs is often depicted as a pyramid where you reach one level and then you move on to the next level. To me, it's not like that. It's not like some voice from above is like, "Congrats, you've unlocked like family." And then you get family, you don't have to worry about your self-esteem needs anymore. It's like, or self-actual. Once you're self-actualized, it's this magical land of self-actualization where you don't need to eat every day. You're never hungry again. That's not true, or never lonely again. Um, I like to view it as a system, where like a sail. It's like sailboat, an integrated model. You want to move in this world feeling like a whole integrated unit. And so sometimes, what I'll do with clients, and we teach our coaches to help with, is to help with inner conflicts. What are the ways in which different aspects of you are pulling? So what we help our clients with is identifying inner conflicts. What are the ways in which they're kind of fighting a war within themselves? And that really takes a systems approach. It's recognizing that, well, maybe from a bird's eye view, we see here that your desperate need for validation is getting in the way of you getting your need for connection, for instance, or your a fear of rejection is getting in the way of you growing in what you want to creatively actualize. Do you see what I'm saying, Niall? These are things that are all operating in tandem.
So if you do identify that their need for validation is getting in the way of their need for expression, for example, and you sort of see the person as being pulled in two directions, how might you address that to sort of create a better functioning system?
Karen Horney is one of my favorite psychologists from back in the day. She was the one to really challenge Freud. She wrote a lot about our inner conflicts. In fact, she has a book called Our Inner Conflicts. And she talks a lot about the importance of bringing into harmony various aspects of ourselves by, um, uh, how do I want to put this? So much of it is getting in touch and really connecting with the most alive, unique, creative center of your being. So much of your inner struggles are transcended the moment you discover your purpose, or the moment you discover, because I think we can have multiple purposes, but you discover that you change your goal hierarchy. So the things that preoccupied you before that seemed like the most important things to address, like your lack of people liking you, or your lack of all the deprivations, it shifts more to what you actually are connected to, that's alive and can contribute to the world. And all those other concerns, it's not they don't become concerns or they're not still fighting, but they naturally get into a harmony with each other when you are really strongly connected to that very special self.
So if you can give somebody the experience of connecting to that core self where they feel like most fully alive, it's almost like you can create a shift in their value hierarchy where that becomes the most important thing and then other things become nested underneath that, and it sort of gives people a better orientation in life.
Ooh, yeah, that's very well put.
And have you, in your practice, have you found any ways for any practices for helping people to really connect to that core self?
Tons. I mean, this is what the whole program is about. This is the whole. I have a whole, not to pitch this, but I have a whole 6 month certification program where, and it's a process. You don't. It doesn't happen in day one of coaching, but you ask a lot of really powerful coaching questions to really have people really challenge people's view of themselves, and challenge, well, what is the extent to which things are coming, the interests and desires and motivations, their actions are really self-directed. They're really coming from this center of being that I was talking about before, this unique, creative, alive center of being, or is it coming from the shoulds? Karen Horney, who I just mentioned before, she calls it the tyrannical shoulds. You know, to what extent do we have these tyrannical shoulds that are holding us back from getting in connection with that center, and also recognizing the feeling of when we're connected to that center through meditation practices and questions and reflection, and experiences where you can learn to trust your self-actualizing compass more. I call it the self-actualizing compass.
Yeah, it's for me that is one of the, I suppose, the core truths of life, that core exists. Like so many people from so many different traditions, backgrounds, models, sort of have reached the same conclusion. And from personal experience, it's definitely been true in my life as well. What do you think about the something I was curious to ask you actually was about, have you ever had Robert Keegan on your podcast talking about his immunity to change framework? No?
It's funny, after so many almost 500 episodes, I never had Keegan on, but I'm a fan.
He is a really interesting model for internal conflicts. I think you guys would have an amazing
I agree.
conversation.
I agree. Maybe my next podcast. You've had him on your show, I imagine?
We did a summit there earlier or last year or this year, and him and his colleague Lisa Leahy came on. They love sharing it, so I'm sure they'd definitely come on. You know. Um, Can you tell me about the importance of shifting from why questions to what questions, and the work of Tasha Eurich?
Tasha Eurich, have she been on your show yet?
The same summit that you spoke at 5 years ago, she was on that one too. She's amazing.
Yeah, she is amazing. Um, it's much better to ask what questions. What can I do right now? What is the most productive thing? In given that this has happened, stay focused, stay connected to what can I do to make this better? What can I do to make myself better? What can I do to change myself and my own environment? If I can't change the environment, what can I do to change myself? What can I do to get into a different environment? What's still within my control? We often ask a lot of why questions instead as a default. It's our kind of our default way of thinking when terrible things happen to us, and you know, it's very natural too. I think we can humanize that, but it's not ultimately as productive.
It's almost like why is sort of like a victim mindset question that sort of digs a bit of a hole, and then what is more like an agency focused question that really puts you in the present and gets you scanning for opportunities and ways to actually improve the situation. So that's, it's such a simple distinction, but so
Yeah,
powerful, you know?
so powerful. Yeah, I'm gonna tell her that we talked about her today
Yeah,
on your podcast. I'm gonna text her after this.
do. Cognitive distortions. So what are cognitive distortions exactly? And are there any in particular that are dangerous for that might lead to a victim mindset?
Yes, one big one is seeing uh, a threat in ambiguous stimuli, or like seeing malevolent intent in ambiguous stimuli, neutral stimuli. A lot of us, if we smile at someone, they don't smile back, but they just have a neutral facial expression. We're like, we're like, "Oh, that's an act of aggression." It's not. People um, have their own lives, they're lost in their own thoughts. Not everything is personal. That leads me to another one, which is personalization. Is a big part of cognitive behavioral therapy. You learn that most things are not personal, and most things, even if it feels personal, it's still a lot about them. It's a lot about what are they, through their own frame of the world, how are they viewing you, and what side of you have they decided to laser like focus on, that's tied to their one thing that their issue. So look, but just like recognizing that, and not feeling like a victim to it all, to every time, like something like that happens, or every time someone just doesn't respond the way you want them to respond. Doesn't You don't have to be a victim. You can also acknowledge that other people, honor other people's self, honor yourself, and honor the autonomy of another human being. A person's allowed to not like you. I mean, come on. That's where I'm at these days. If someone seems to, for no fathomable reason that I can comprehend, not like me, it's like, okay, good for them. Like they have their own. They're not me. They have their own unique tastes and worldview, and we probably don't share the same flavor of ice cream we like anyway. Like they're not my person. And but good for them too. Like there's something sacred. I think there's something sacred about everyone's self-actualization journey on this planet. And I've been studying something called the White Triad, which is very much about the sanctity of human nature, and the sanctity of each human life and its own unique journey that it's on.
I really like that. It reminds me of not needing to be liked. Have you read The Courage to Be Disliked by any chance?
Yeah, I love that book. I quote that in Rise Above, in the self-esteem chapter. Yeah, yeah, I love that book. For me, and for some people, it doesn't take a lot of courage to be disliked. You're okay with it. You get to a place where you feel like you really value yourself, and you trust yourself, and you trust your intentions. That's a big one. Trust your intentions. My friend Raquel Hopkins, who was on my podcast recently, she used that phrase, and it stuck out to me. I was like, yeah, I love that. Like that's the best you can do. If someone misinterprets it, or doesn't see the intentions, what can you do? You can't control others and the way they think. You can only control the way you think about yourself.
For sure. There's a they talk about it like there's an old Jewish proverb in that book, and it's something like it's like the 1 in 10 rule. It's like in every group of 10 people, you'll get on well with 7 of them. 2 of them you'll be indifferent about, and one person is just not going to like you, and that's perfectly okay. And I think just knowing that, it's obviously there's no science behind that, but it's just a good rule of thumb. This person doesn't like me. It's the 1 in 10. It's great, no problem. Embrace it.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that, and I like to teach my students something else. I say, well, do you ever think to yourself, do you like this person? Are you like, you're allowed to also not like people too. Like, that's the beauty of autonomy. Acknowledge, I appreciate, I don't, maybe not appreciate it, but I acknowledge and honor that this person, doesn't seem to like me. But if I'm being honest with myself, they're not someone I want really would have been first on my list to hang out with either, to be quite frank. And you're allowed to feel that way too about someone else. It's not a, you know what I'm saying?
Such a simple reframe, but like hard to do in the moment. But yeah, like really really important. You mentioned there, Scott, um, about this. I'm gonna get your words wrong, but it was something along the lines of there's a little bit of a sacredness to the self-actualization journey that everybody is on this planet. And
Yes.
I'm curious to ask you, because you're quite a serious scientist. You're one of the most cited psychologists, I think, top 1% psychologists, cited scientists in the world, I think.
I would say scientists of all fields. That's what the ranking was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose the question is, where do you stand on the big existential questions of life? Do you believe there is a purpose to all of this? There's an intelligence at work. Do you think?
A teleos to the universe.
I suppose so. And we play some kind of small part in that?
Do we play some part in it? We are a part of it. Um, we don't, from a free will perspective. Um, it's almost like we're watching this movie unfold of our life, and we don't really see the larger patterns until years later. There are so many things that have that I'm only getting aha moments now, that seeing a larger arc of it all. And I'm sure I'll have so many more insights when I'm older, God willing, that I get much, much older. And then I start to see those insights, and I'm like, oh, wow, yes, that makes sense that that didn't work out with that. And that I do believe strongly in universe alignment. I think that's a real, not a woo-woo thing. I think there's a scientific basis to it. If you must have a scientific basis, if anyone must, I think that there is. And so many things we force and we try to push the thing. Oh, why I went on this date with this person? Why did they not call me back? Oh, I didn't get this job, but I know that I was perfect for the job. But you realize from some distance, and that from a universal alignment perspective, a lot of those things really, if you're being honest, they really weren't right for you, and you really weren't right for them either. And uh, and uh, and and being radically honest about that allows you to start to have a lot more acceptance about the things that happen to you, and less of a victim mindset over everything.
I couldn't agree more. So that's pretty much everything, Scott. It's been so fun to speak with you and catch up. I've really enjoyed this.
Likewise.
For people that want to learn more about your work and perhaps take a course with you in the self-actualization programs, where would you send them after this conversation?
Thank you so much. So centerforhumanpotential.com, that's my center. Um, and we offer coaching training programs, but I'm also going to start putting up more, like I teach like the Transcend Core, an 8-week course, and I think I'm rebranding that as the Science of Living Well. We'll see. But yeah, I teach course stuff. You can go to the centerforhumanpotential.com, and scottbarrykaufman.com, and I have there everything with my podcast catalog, which has ended after 11 years, but I still have the catalog of almost 500 episodes, and then 11 books, and yeah, and resources and things. And people are free to reach out to me, especially if they like this episode and they want to tell me. No, I'm joking. I don't need validation, but people are welcome to contact me for whatever reason. If I can lend them a helping hand as well, let me know.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, sir. I'm a big fan of the Weekend University.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy getting our 7 Insights newsletter. This is a once per month email where I share 7 of the most valuable insights I've uncovered in the previous 30 days. It includes book, podcast, and documentary recommendations, as well as questions and quotes specifically curated to help you live a more creative, intentional, and meaningful life. It currently goes out to over 50,000 subscribers each month. And if you're interested in joining them, you can sign up via the link in the description.